Hello and welcome to this video. Today we are going to learn how scaling works in Gaea and how we can scale any landscape in any of our 3D application or a game engine to match the landscape that we see in Gaea to what we get in our 3D software. So let's start with a really simple example. We take a mountain node. Now we auto level it so it is using the full height range of 0 to 2600. Now let's clamp it at a non-height which is 500 meters. Now our mountain is 500 meter high. So if you are not sure how high your landscape is, you can always use this height sampler right here and see what height each point is at. To get even more precise, we would take a constant node and combine it with max. So you might remember this technique from our video on constant node. To recap, using combine at max mode with constant will put a flat surface in our terrain at the height that our constant node is. So this is especially useful for this case. So if we pin this by pressing F, and now let's take constant and use the height, let's say 200 meter. So at 200 meter we still get our terrain. So 200 meter is not our highest point. So we slowly increase this. Let's say 400 meter. We still have this. And since we know that it will completely disappear at 500 meter, which is our top height. So we'll put 500 meter here and it completely disappeared. Now let's say 490 meter and we get a little bit of our mountain poking through. So now with this method you can get the exact height of any terrain. Now that we have our height, let's export this. Now since we are being precise, we will change our scale right here to 4096 so that it matches exactly 1 meter per pixel. Now we are going to make two exports from here, one for 4096 which will be used in Blender and another for 4033 which will be used for Unreal Engine. For 4033 we will put 4033 here. Now that is being really precise, but you don't need to be that precise because 4096 and 5000 are almost the same. So here we have three height maps, one of which is EXR, which is the best file format for VFX and stuff. It will store high quality data with almost no compression and it takes less sites to store in our local drive. And we are using 16-bit PNG for Unreal Engine. And I did another export and these two are using normalized method for our build and this one is using raw. So as you can see with raw, since our mountain was only 500 but our maximum could be 2600, so it's not that bright. So with normalized we are getting bright pixel because the brightest pixel is 500 meter high. Now let's move to Blender to test that out. Now we are in Blender and now it's time for the default cube to shine. We'll put X-ray so we can see through this cube. So let's change the end clip distance. Now let's scale our box. So this is 2 meter by 2 meters. So let's scale it to dimensions we want our landscape to be. And it seems I made a mistake since we were being precise. So much for being precise. Okay, now we are using precision. Let's focus on the cube. This is our cube and this is where we want our landscape to be. Since this is 500 meter tall, let's move it so that it's touching the grid. So we are moving it in Z by 250 meter. Now let's bring our height maps. For that we'll need a plane. We have our plane. Now let's scale our plane. So now our plane is matching the scale. Now let's go to the modifiers and first apply a subsurface modifier so that we have more vertices to work with. So we'll put simple and 10 subdivisions. And now let's apply a displace modifier. So now let's open our texture here and use our height map as the texture. We'll put 0 here so that our landscape is touching the grid again. Now let's go to the orthographic view. So now let's increase the strength. So if you increase the strength and see there is no displacement in the plane, that means that the plane is not scaled properly in Z direction. So let's go to its properties and scale it by 500 meter in the Z. Now as you can see, this is our mountain and it's perfectly inside our cube. Now if we want, let's say, our landscape to be 7000 meter, because why not? So we will scale our cube accordingly. So this is 7000 meter. Now for the height, we would need to know what our height scale ratio was in Gaea, which is shown right here, which is 0.63. We would take 7000 meter and multiply it by 0.63. Now that is the scale if we were using row. Since we are using normalized, so we will have to find our own height scale ratio, which is not that difficult. We just have to divide 500 by 4096 meter, which is not hard to do since Blender can handle this calculation really well. Here we will type 500 divided by 4096. And this is our height scale ratio. Now if we multiply this to 7000, now we are getting the proportions that we want. So now let's bring our cube to the center, and now let's move it in Z by half of this, 427. And now with our plane, we can scale it as well, 7000 meter here. And let's put, let's say, 900 meter, going back to our orthographic view. Now we can see that it's poking out of our cube. So let's decrease it a bit, let's say 1.18, maybe more. Our landscape is just around touching it. Now we know how to scale the landscape in our 3D applications. It's time to move to our game engine. Before that, let's see how our row output should be scaled. Let's go to the texture and change the texture to row. And we need to change the strength so that it matches our cube. Maybe we will need more. Before that, let's change the Z of our plane. So let's say 1200 meter. And now let's adjust the strength from here. And there it is, almost matching it. Now this is how we scale the normalized and row both. Now it's finally time to move to Unreal. So before importing it to any game engine, you would need to know two things. First is how the scale works in that game engine particularly. So in Unreal, how it works is it uses 1 meter per pixel at the default scale, which is 100 written right here. That is for X and Y. For Z, by default, this 100 means 512 meter. Now let's talk about how we can manipulate this scale in X, Y and Z so that it matches exactly our terrain. So in game engine, we don't need the cube. You can still use the cube if you think I'm lying, which I'm not. So now let's import that height map. So this is our height map, and we were using 4033 for Unreal. And since for 4033 our scale in Gaea was also the same, we don't need to change the XY scale. Let's say you have 6000 meter and you want to scale that to 4033. So that's simple. You take this 100 and multiply it by whatever was your scale in Gaea, which was, let's say, 6000. And then divide by 4033, which is the scale that we are using right here. Now this should scale your landscape to the exact limits of what it was before, and the same for Z scale. Since we were using the normalized and we know our highest point was 500 meter, we will multiply it by 500 and divide by what's default in Unreal, which is 512, and we get the scale. If we were using row instead of normalized, we would multiply that 100 by the 2600 meter regardless of what our final height was, because row will use that 2600 as the reference for the height map. And now you can just click import and wait for it to crash. And now you know how to scale your landscape to the exact same dimensions as in Gaea. Luckily it didn't crash, and now we have our mountain. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.